Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay. Obviously, the news cycle continues to be very strong, and there's just a lot to cover. I want to commend everybody. I think we've been really strong. I think we've been really newsy. I think it's really urgent, and I think we're on top of all the right storylines. Before we jump into that, I do want to acknowledge that Hurricane Zeta obviously did hit the southeast and really walloped Atlanta overnight. I do know that many of our colleagues there are still without power this morning. I want to encourage everybody to check on your friends, check on your colleagues. At last count, about 3 hours ago, nearly 2 million people across the South were without power, and many of them are our colleagues, so please check on them. A couple of things that I wanted to note that I think have been excellent. I'd point to John Avlon's reporting this morning about how Dr. Scott Atlas pushed to slow testing and convinced Florida and the governor there to do so. Really good, strong reporting for us. I really want to note once again how important Jamie Gengel's reporting of the Bob Woodward tapes have been, and just the exclusive nature of all of those to CNN throughout this last month. Again, yesterday, and Anderson Cooper's interview last night of Bob Woodward himself. Again, really terrific. Also terrific was Chris Cuomo's interview with Miles Taylor last night. Chris asked all the right questions, and it was a terrific half hour and an exceptional interview. I just wanted to highlight all of that very strong programming on CNN. Obviously, a lot going on both the political side and the coronavirus side. And as we've said all week, this is the coronavirus election, and so they all come together. The politics of pandemic as well. Let's start with politics and start with David Chalian.
Good morning, Jeff. So yes, on that front, as the numbers keep ticking up with the coronavirus, the contrast just continues to get so very clear between these two candidates running for president with 5 days to go. I think we should not miss, and I don't think we have, I'm not suggesting we have, but I think it is worth to continue to pay attention to what Biden said yesterday when he said, I'm not running on the false promise of being able to end this pandemic by flipping a switch. Let science drive our decisions. This, to me, sounds like somebody who is thinking there's a distinct possibility he may actually take over here, win this election, and is level setting expectations with the American people that just the election of Joe Biden as president is not going to make the pandemic disappear. And it was really interesting to hear him start doing that. This, as the president, the incumbent, who has been overseeing the country's response, says that a vaccine is imminent, and he continues to say that we've rounded the corner. So the contrast yesterday on the trail with that sound from each of them, it couldn't be more stark. I'm sure we'll hear it again today as the battle for Florida's electoral votes becomes the centerpiece on the campaign trail today. Both Trump and Biden have events in Florida. In fact, both will be in Tampa today. Biden's also doing a Broward County event earlier, and then Trump heads to North Carolina, another key battleground state. But as we know, Florida is a big, huge electoral prize. There's a lot of attention on it. There's a new poll out from NBC Marist this morning in Florida, showing it 51 Biden, 47 Trump. That almost mirrors identically to our Florida poll last week. And that is where we will see the candidates today. So that's sort of the heart of the campaign trail today. I also want to note that Arlette Science is reporting Joe Biden is now pledging that if he's elected president, he will sign an executive order to form a task force that will focus on reuniting the 545 immigrant children who've been separated from their families. He's putting this pledge in a new digital campaign ad in Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. That is an executive order he will do, he says, on his first day as president, creating this federal task force to reunite these children with their parents. So that is out today as well. You saw our national poll out yesterday, and obviously this is all about a state-by-state battle, and we don't over-focus on national polls, but there are a couple things inside those numbers that I do think get at important things for us to be looking at in these next 5 days as we discuss these candidates. First of all, I thought it was fascinating to see when asked likely Biden voters said 48% of them said that their vote is a vote for Biden, 48% that their vote is a vote against Trump. It just shows you an even split there, and that Trump is as much a motivating vote for Biden supporters as Biden is, which may be a very good thing for him and part of his success should he win. But it's also worth noting that the vote for Biden number among Biden supporters has been steadily climbing over the last several months. And for Trump, 79% of his voters, it's a vote for Trump. Only 17% of his voters are a vote against Biden. So all the efforts we see from Donald Trump to make Biden into this totally unacceptable alternative, that is not even a motivating force for his own voters, is what these numbers show. And if you just look at these two candidates' favorabilities, again, I know we talk a lot about 2016 versus 2020, but one of the key points that is a point of difference between 16 and 20 is that both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were very unliked, very unpopular, not seen as trustworthy. And we know that for the voters in 16 who had unfavorable opinions of them both, they went overwhelmingly for Trump. Well, first of all, that slice of the electorate is just minuscule now. I think 4% of our poll have an unfavorable opinion of both. But what we do see is that the Democrat, Joe Biden, has really good net positive favorability, and Donald Trump is completely upside down. So I just wouldn't want to lose that in some of the sort of candidate qualities in there. And then I will just also note, 39% of the country says things are going well today. 60% say badly. And if you look at the historical chart that Jenna just included, you see that 39% going well number is really a demarcation point for those presidents that got reelected and those that didn't. And it is worth taking a look at that as well. In terms of beyond the Florida campaign trail today in the battle for 270, we have Bill Weir taking a look at battleground Wisconsin, which, as you know, is a COVID hot zone. So Bill Weir has that piece today, and Christina Alessi is taking a look at the economic policies of each candidate and what they are proposing. In the battle for control of the United States Senate, I just want to note three different items worth our attention. One, you saw Manu Raju's reporting when he was in Georgia and caught up with Kelly Loeffler, who you know is in that special election in Georgia. And she was being pressed by a reporter about the Access Hollywood tape. Manu seemed to have to Manu was there at that moment and seemed to have to remind her that what the reporter's asking about is the Access Hollywood tape. And she feigned to have no idea what the Access Hollywood tape was and not familiar with it. It was sort of a really just bizarre moment of clear pleading with her to disappear in a moment and not have to acknowledge the reality that the president's been on tape talking about sexually harassing women. So she pleaded ignorance, and it's quite a moment. So Manu can be up around that. I also the Ossoff-Perdue race, the other Georgia Senate race, there was quite a debate moment there worth taking a look at where Ossoff just lays into Perdue on COVID, on healthcare, on his own stock issues. He calls them a crook, but it is just one of those unbelievable moments of seeing a candidate just prosecute the case against the incumbent in a pretty stern way. So I would urge folks to take a look at that. And then Donald Trump's sound in Arizona with Martha McSally. This is just amazing to me when he's like, get up here quick. You have 1 minute, Martha. Come on. Nobody wants to hear this. I mean, they are battling to maintain their majority in the United States Senate. The president of her own party is completely undermining her at his event when that Arizona Senate race is so critical to the math for majority control. So I think, again, just not losing sight of this battle for control of the Senate, there's a lot of good elements out there today. And I think that's where we start.
Okay. I'm just going to pick up on your Senate race stuff, because I think we do need to continue to pay attention to the Senate races. I totally agree with you on the Kelly Loeffler moment. I totally agree with you on the McSally moment where basically Trump humiliated her. I do think it harkens back to her refusal to answer at the debate she had as to whether or not she was proud of her association with Trump. But nonetheless, I totally agree. And the other Senate note, I think yesterday, Susan Collins was given 30 seconds to answer whether systemic racism exists in Maine, and she used 5 seconds to say it doesn't. I think that, just using all of these moments to get at the Senate races is a really important note. I think besides your note about the dueling rallies in Florida today in this final push, I do think that the continuing efforts by the GOP and the Trump campaign to not get every vote counted are really a big storyline as the courts begin to rule, and you now have a bunch of legal experts coming out to say it's too late to mail in your ballots now. You should just vote in person on Tuesday. So I think that's a developing storyline. And obviously we'll hear on the economic news about the GDP growing at a record 33%. And I think that's an important storyline today as well. Okay, Washington.
Okay, so starting with voting, we're now at more than 75 million have voted, more than a third of all registered voters. In some of the states that are just eye-popping, North Carolina, half, Georgia and Texas, also at about half, both leading the way, and 25 states in Washington, D.C. that have more than 50% of the total 2016. So it's just these numbers continue. You mentioned these two big rulings, which in both cases for now seem to be going in the Democrats' direction. In Pennsylvania, the court's leaving in place a state Supreme Court decision that allowed the counting of ballots received up to 3 days after the election. The note here is that Pennsylvania officials are having the ballots separated, so the ones that come in before versus the ones that come in after, which means, and the court did not make it clear that this could not be revisited after the election. Also to note, Amy Coney Barrett did not participate in this, not because she was recusing herself, but because she didn't have time to fully dive into it. So again, all things that are up in the air should Pennsylvania become close. North Carolina, same deal. The court allowed the counting of ballots in North Carolina received up to 9 days after the election, as long as those ballots are postmarked by Election Day. And again, Amy Coney Barrett did not participate. We're still waiting on 2 more voting cases from North Carolina and Wisconsin. In terms of the COVID of Washington, obviously there's very strong language coming out of the White House Coronavirus Task Force yesterday, saying we continue to see unrelenting broad community spread in the Midwest, Upper Midwest, and West. This, as Trump is on the trail continuing his downplay of the pandemic, his new refrain being that reporters will stop covering it after November 4th. He also claimed yesterday that a new vaccine will be available momentarily. This is Dr. Fauci is saying it won't be ready until January or later. And then news this morning from the Democrats about new documents showing that HHS sought to lever over $250 million in a COVID ad campaign to help Trump's reelection. You mentioned a terrific reporting this morning, especially as these two head to Florida, about Dr. Scott Atlas working with the governor to get testing down, which we all know is what the president had wanted, and he found a willing participant in the governor of Florida. We have more reporting coming today on Birx and how she has been completely pushed out by Atlas. Mark Meadows, just to note, recommend that Americans carry a bottle of Purell when asked by PBS this morning about the lack of adherence to CDC guidelines. And then obviously you mentioned the whole Kushner telling Woodward that Trump was getting the country back from the doctors in what he called a negotiated settlement. The only other thing that I just want to mention from here is that David mentioned that Arlette House reporting on Biden and immigration. At 9 o'clock this morning, House Judiciary is going to release a 551-page report chronicling the development and subsequent fallout of the family separation policy. The headline is that there weren't enough beds for the babies, and just this incredible, looking through of that policy and the implications on children and how the administration just went forward anyway. And this, as there are reports out there that Stephen Miller, if Trump should win, is going to push this even further. And that's what I got.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move to coronavirus, anyone with thoughts on politics, elections, Trump, White House, Biden, etc.?
Hey, Jeff, on the Supreme Court on North Carolina and Pennsylvania, just a note for me, and I'll defer to the legal experts a bit on this, but just because they made these rulings right now and citing too close to the election, et cetera, doesn't, and I guess termed as by most analysts as a victory for Democrats, it doesn't mean that the court couldn't do something different or manage ballots or ballot counting in Pennsylvania and North Carolina differently after the election, after Tuesday, as more suits come up and different challenges arise. I don't know that this isn't like I don't believe this is a guarantee that all those ballots will necessarily be counted or treated as they would be if you take what happened yesterday right now. I do want to just note that we should just be conscious of the fact that there could be different rulings post-election. First of all, they want us to cite too close to the election, et cetera. But of course, Amy Barrett could be involved post-election, et cetera, as she has time to review. But I don't think it's a 100% guarantee necessarily that ballots will be counted in those places till X date if they decide to review with a different approach after the election.
Hey, Michael, it's David. Justice Alito pretty much said that in his dissent, and I think in the North Carolina case, whichever one came out yesterday. So that's language we could probably quote to reach your point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And Michael, I think most of our legal analysts, David, correct me if I'm wrong, but do say, like, you're making a very important point, because they do separate out sort of the pre-election litigation versus the post-election litigation, which is a whole different universe. So I think the parties have been so focused on trying to litigate anything they needed to get in place for Election Day itself and the casting of these ballots. And then, of course, post-Election Day, there's a whole other world of gamesmanship that the parties are going to engage in.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I just want to emphasize that for everybody to make sure that we don't go overboard on presenting what it means, right? Potentially past once the votes are in. So thank you. Jeff, I just have one other note on, since I'm here on the Kushner thing. This is the second sort of Kushner bombshell within a few days. I realize that we don't really have time to spend a lot of time on Jared Kushner. We did an excellent job, obviously, as you said, with Jamie having the Woodward tapes and everything on Kushner last night. But it just does bring up again the role of Kushner in Trump world and sort of all the mystery and intrigue, and I would even add evil, because his comments about African Americans was obviously horrifying, and in this case, just a guy who really doesn't know what he's doing, talking about how the coronavirus should be approached, and all of his comments about how they had beaten it, basically, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the influence of Jared Kushner and how that has carried forward, despite the fact that he has no experience or credentials or anything else to deal with any of these things. And it's just amazing that this guy has been for 4 years such an influence on the policy and course of the country.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Jeff, picking up on that, in the battle between Trump and science, there's another data point that the country is falling on the side of science. These are the numbers from our national poll yesterday, giving Fauci the favorable rating of 54 to 19, and the president a favorable rating of 41 to 56. The country views Fauci much more favorably, despite the president's constant attacks on him.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I just want to add one more thing. Sorry. On the Susan Collins front, again, outrageous comments. Totally ignorant about her own state. The second largest population of Somali refugees in the entire country are in Maine, after Minneapolis-St. Paul area. A very large immigrant population that came into Maine and has faced incredible racism in that state, and her lack of awareness of sort of what's going on in her own state and brushing it off is quite jarring.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Is there anything else out of Washington?
No, that's all I got.
Okay. Let's move to coronavirus and Matthew.
Thanks, Jeff. So a few days to Election Day, we're in dramatically worse shape than a month ago, and getting worse. Fauci saying last night, quote, "There's going to be a whole lot of pain in this country with regards to additional cases and hospitalizations and deaths." Yesterday alone saw almost 80,000 new cases, the third highest day ever, 994 deaths reported. Most of the last 10 days now have seen deaths near 1,000, which is a situation we haven't seen in months. October has been just an insanely surging month. The average of new cases daily up 81% in a month. We're on pace for 9 million cases total, probably Saturday. Gottlieb, the latest of many voices to suggest we'll cross the 100,000 case a day mark in the coming weeks. Just an unfathomable number, maybe even this week, he says. And he also says we're on trajectory to look a lot like Europe as we enter November and we see what's going on in Europe. On vaccines, Fauci now expects it could be January or later for the first doses. He, of course, also said yesterday that normal life may not fully return until 2022, and clearly now in favor of a national mask mandate. And just as we go into Halloween weekend and Thanksgiving around the corner, experts ramping up the warnings about holidays. Fauci echoing what we're hearing from so many others about what is spreading the virus these days. These, quote, innocent family and friends gatherings, the 6, 8, 10 people really driving the spread now. The White House task force really even highlights the potential for Halloween spread as well. On the CNN map, there are 0 states moving in the right direction this 7-day period, 41 rising in cases week to week. I know all these data reports can seem like a giant wash, but these internal White House weekly task force reports given to states are really the most unvarnished weekly report cards coming from the administration. Our White House team has been obtaining them. The latest one says, we continue to see unrelenting broad community spread in the Midwest, upper Midwest, and West. It also calls for aggressive mitigation, and it calls out states who need to do better with masks and with mitigation, states like Idaho, Georgia, Alabama, Utah, Tennessee, and Missouri. We are seeing that unrelenting spread really show up on the ground in the form of these hospitalization numbers right now. At least 14 states now at the all-time peak levels of hospitalization. And it's important to look at it that way because while Giroir yesterday said that overall hospitalizations are down from the summer, that's a national average. That includes hugely populous states like New York and California. It sort of ignores the fact that at least 14 states are dealing with a record high hospital crisis right now. In battleground Florida, hosting, of course, both candidates today, Florida is up 60% in new daily cases in the month since fully reopening. Battleground Pennsylvania, averaging above 2,000 cases a day, highest levels ever. Wisconsin remains in this urgent crisis, averaging 4,000 cases a day, but also a huge positivity rate, 27% on average this week. We have Adrian near Milwaukee in Wisconsin. On schools, obviously the big picture is that public schools, while dealing with problems, seem to be surviving overall. But good, solid data is hard to come by. And a great example of this is Florida, where all the counties are back in person, but every district has different rules for reporting cases. And many of those districts do not require sick children to get tests or report cases, meaning the child case count in schools could be very underreported in Florida. And Rosa had a good piece on this that rolled out on New Day. Elsewhere on the health front, obviously a lot of discussion, a lot of different studies on immunity. A new report showing 90% of people who were mild or moderately ill maintained immunity for 5 months. This comes on the heels of a study earlier this month that said 7 months. And then on vaccines, just something interesting to watch is just this increasing talk tempering expectations a little bit from the likes of Paul Offit and Anthony Fauci. Vaccines might end up preventing severe illness. They might not fully prevent infection, meaning asymptomatic spread is still possible after vaccination. Something to watch. And Sanjay has a fresh look piece tonight for the lead in EVOF on Trump rallies and spread. Looking at 18 rallies since August, CNN found that about half the time, about a month later, there was a significant rise in cases in the county of the rally relative to the surrounding state. We've also got Elizabeth and Jacqueline available from Health. And a few interesting sports notes on COVID. Major League Baseball opening an investigation into Turner's return to the field against the safety protocols. The Dodgers celebration on hold. That huge cancellation in the Big Ten, Wisconsin-Nebraska this weekend because of all of Wisconsin's cases. The NFL exploring the possibility of 20% capacity at the Super Bowl, not the full Super Bowl that Governor DeSantis called for. The wrap piece today, Nick Watt for 4, 6, 8, and 10. And that's COVID today.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll open up 1 second, but I do think that with both candidates in Florida with these rallies, it is a really good day to look at Florida. Matthew's point about COVID cases up, I think you said 60%. And coupled with John Avalon's reporting about Atlas and the push to diminish testing and Ron DeSantis buying into that, I think Florida is very much in vogue today in terms of focus. And we all know that Florida, we keep talking about Florida and Pennsylvania, but Florida's going to play a huge role next Tuesday. And so I do think it's worth focusing. It's where the election and the pandemic come together today. Thoughts on COVID?
Hey, Jeff, in that same vein, since we have reporters in all the battleground states, which also happen to match up with a lot of the places where coronavirus is having the most significant surges, like as we talked about over and over, Wisconsin, Bill Weir is there. If you're doing a political piece or a political hit, or we're now doing these political whips, which are awesome with the latest on what's going on in these battleground states, if you have a correspondent on live to talk, hey, the race in Wisconsin or the race in Pennsylvania or the race in Arizona, or as Jeff just said, Florida, it's not a bad idea to save time for a question about the latest on coronavirus in that state. We're there. These guys are all well up on what's going on with the virus as well as the election in the places that they've moved to cover the election. And it's not a bad idea to double up, talk to them about the latest polls, the latest number of early votes, all of that stuff, and then say, okay, let's turn now. You're obviously not coronavirus hot zone also. Let's turn to that and ask a question or two about coronavirus and just get an update from there. So that we're constantly, one, updating on both stories, and two, intertwining them, as we know, and as David Chalian expressed at the top of this call, they are as intertwined as any two things could be. And I think it's really important to just take advantage of our reporters out in the field on both fronts.
Any other thoughts on COVID? Okay, Matthew, you want to hit the rest of domestic?
Sure thing. Obviously, you mentioned Hurricane now Tropical Storm Zeta, which sort of transitioned from being this landfall and flooding situation in New Orleans to this sort of widespread southeast power outage, 2 million power out problem. Most of New Orleans without power as well. At least 2 deaths reported, one in Louisiana, one in Mississippi, and AMRA is in New Orleans on the heels of that. In the Walter Wallace Jr. case in Philadelphia, his family is set to see the body cam video today. We do not know exactly when the public will see the body cam video. Police say soon, after the family has viewed it and sort of processed. We expect to hear from the family, from the attorney later today, and maybe we'll learn more there. No major unrest in a curfew Philadelphia overnight. Dozens of arrests for rioting and looting, and we'll hear from federal law enforcement a little bit later today who are promising indictments from the violent unrest. And we got Bryn in Philadelphia. The reporting out, of course, the latest in the Michigan terror plot, the Delaware suspect in the alleged plot to kidnap Whitmer, also allegedly considering acts of violence elsewhere, South Carolina, even against the Republican governor, based on social media. And then from the race beat, just a few days before the election, the families of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, and Alvin Cole joining together at a rally today in Chicago to encourage people to vote. And we got some good exclusive interview material on the walk up to this that's up on digital now, and that Sarah Seidner is putting together as a piece for CNN tonight.
Good, excellent. That'll be great. Okay, anyone with any thoughts on domestic? Okay, international.
Hey, Jeff. We have a lot of good COVID lines this morning, but I just wanted to start with the French attack, because it's our CNNI lead. Right now, there are 3 dead in this knife attack in the Notre Dame Basilica in Nice. The local mayor has described this as a terrorist attack. We're alerting all the details on exactly what happened as they come in and waiting for a police presser. But obviously we know, and we've been saying on this call, that tensions are high on the heels of Islamophobia accusations against France by Erdogan, and also the latest cover from Charlie Hebdo mocking him back. It's also the Prophet's birthday today, so that could be a tie. Many world leaders expressing solidarity with France, including Turkey, notably. So now the country's security alert level moves up to emergency, and Macron is heading to Nice this afternoon, so we'll see what tone he strikes. We've also confirmed the stabbing of a guard outside the French consulate in Saudi Arabia that happened this morning, so we're tying that incident in too. We've got Cyril in France and Arwa in Istanbul on that story. Just on COVID, parts of Europe now taking extreme measures. They tried to avoid it, but France and Germany entering second lockdowns. Jim Bitterman has all of the details of the measures in each country. Interestingly, it's counter to the UK, where even though a report says cases have tripled in 3 weeks, ministers keep playing down the need for a lockdown. Scott has really strong reporting today out of the Czech Republic, where the infection rate is 6 times higher than the U.S. per capita. He takes us inside a hospital where he finds 1,000 healthcare workers are contracting the virus daily. And in one region, they're so desperate for help, they're recruiting teenagers to work. It's just an overwhelming situation there where the hospital system has seemed to collapse. Matthew Chance has a whip with all the latest from Russia. Putin said this morning Russia does not plan to impose a nationwide lockdown. Targeted measures are possible. We know they're seeing record cases, and they also have their mandatory mask mandate. China now looking dramatically different than the U.S. and Europe as restrictions are eased. Less people are wearing masks on the streets there. It's looking more normal, and David Culver has that whip. And that's where we start.
Okay, thank you, Penny. Business.
Jeff, good morning. Stock futures whipsawing this morning following Wall Street's worst day since June 11th. Investors digesting and trying to make sense of 2 major pieces of economic data, GDP, U.S. growth, as you mentioned, and jobs. Moments ago, the Commerce Department said the U.S. economy grew at a record 33.1 annual % last quarter, showing that the U.S. economy in the summer recovered a large chunk of what was a historically enormous lost ground during the spring. This was the fastest rate on record in the third quarter. And what drove this? We parsed the data this morning. Consumer spending drove much of these gains. People having extra cash this summer thanks to those enhanced employment benefits that have now expired. They spent on big items, durable goods like cars and washing machines. The gain, while large, means the economy has recovered about 60% of its losses through March. But this is really important, and I sent a note about this last night. This is the annual rate. The 33% is the annual rate at which the government assumes the economy will grow for the next 3 quarters. Does not mean that the economy grew last quarter by 33.1%. If you're looking at it from quarter to quarter, the GDP grew by 7.4% from Q2 to Q3. This is still the fastest on record, but I just wanted to make that point. Obviously, with this record rate in Q3, the likes of which we never seen before, this is rear view data and obviously does not capture many of the holes in the current recovery ahead of what economists and health officials are warning is going to be a long winter. We also had another piece of data out this morning on jobs, the labor sector, which has obviously seen massive pressure as of late. Last week, 751,000 Americans filed for new unemployment claims. This was down 40,000 from the week prior. So heading in the right direction, but nearly 4 times what we would consider normal, and obviously still stubbornly high. And of course, the daily refrain on stimulus, nothing moving. Mana reporting that Nancy Pelosi sending a letter to Mnuchin this morning saying that Democrats still waiting for a response from the White House on multiple issues they had to move forward with negotiations. Christine Romans and Julia Chatterley and Christina Alessi are up and available on that. And one sector, as we've continued to talk about over and over again, air travel, continuing to be hit hard. Travelers are skittish and airlines doing all they can to portray safety. And when we got a glimpse of what may be the future of air travel, United Airlines announcing this morning that it will begin offering free coronavirus tests to passengers on selected routes. They hope that this will not only increase traffic, but perhaps could spark international cooperation and break down some of those travel restrictions. United CEO Scott Kirby was on CNBC this morning, talked a little bit about these new measures, but saying that demand right now has flatlined due to the rise in COVID cases. And he is saying that we are not out of the woods until we get a vaccine, perhaps a year or so away. Pete Muntean is available on all of that. And finally, tech giants will be reporting their third quarter earnings this afternoon after the closing bell. Amazon clearly expected to be one of the biggest winners as consumers flock to the e-commerce giant during the pandemic shutdown. We also have Apple and Google and Facebook as well. This obviously happening a day after the trio of tech CEOs sparred with senators yesterday on the influence of politics and speech. The hearing was supposed to focus on Section 230, but clearly it was anything but. Brian Fung said it best in his analysis last night about the hearing. It was worthless and petty. So we have Donnie O'Sullivan up and available on all of those threads today. That's where we start.
Okay. So before we move to digital, does anybody have anything they want to bring up?
I know we sent the note around last night, but just in comparison to how other news organizations are reporting the GDP numbers, as a consumer, I just want to know last quarter, the annualized rate, I know is
Hey, Rick, you're breaking up. So, Rick, you're breaking up. It's hard to hear you.
Okay.
Okay, Rick, it's your connection is not good. Anybody else? Okay, let's move to digital, please. Anybody on from digital?
Over to. Oh, hi.
Digital?
Hi, it's Christina. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, Christina. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hi, I'm so sorry about that. Some mute problems this morning. So we had 31.7 million uniques yesterday. 2 stories over 2 million. The Woodward audio with Jared Kushner, The Identity of Anonymous. And then we had 3 more over 1 million. Kevin Lettek on Trump being an unhappy warrior, an aggregation on Trump's Chicago loan, and a piece on the economy, how Trump stacks up against former presidents. Today, leading the pack with over 17,000 concurrents is Stephen Collinson's analysis on new audio tapes show how Trump's bet against science. Collinson takes the Kushner audio from yesterday and does a good job pushing the story forward for us this morning. Then a piece that has a different and interesting angle with the headline, Wives of the Deplorables group is for women married to Trump supporters. It's about a woman who started a private Facebook group called Wives of the Deplorables after realizing her husband voted for Trump and has seen a huge membership growth over the pandemic. The piece captures a great conversation between 6 women from the group on what it's like to be married to someone with opposing ideological views. And then Kavanaugh tweaks voting opinion after Vermont official asks for a correction. Further on the Supreme Court, we will have a piece coming on why there's contradictory rulings on mail-in deadlines in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Also in top stories this morning, the knife attack in Nice. We're capturing all the breaking lines in a DLE and are looking to do a broader step-back piece on everything happening there right now. On coronavirus, more than 40 states are reporting an increase in COVID-19 cases, and many in the Midwest are seeing record hospitalizations. We've got a piece on that and following all the developments there. We also have a good headline, Don't Get a False Sense of Security with Testing, from Holly Yan and Michelle Krupa. It takes a look at Pence's travel and how his testing negative means pretty much nothing, that he was not infected from 4 to 5 days ago, and also expands this into a general population context with how ordinary folks should understand testing and results. We have that enterprise piece mentioned earlier on Atlas's push to slow testing down in Florida, giving a sense of how Atlas is working behind the scenes. We continue to follow all the threads around Walter Wallace shooting and what's happening in Philly. And we have from Harmeet Kaur the exclusive piece already mentioned on the families of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, and Alvin Cole making a push to get out to vote. And new on voting today, we have an interactive. It's a state-by-state guide on laws and restrictions about taking photos while you vote. And just one more to mention quickly, Facebook fact-checkers are getting death threats. Donnie O'Sullivan spoke to 2 fact-checkers hired by Facebook who say they've never gotten so many threats for just doing their jobs. One of them plays a voicemail where the guy tells him to drink bleach and die. And then when he calls the guy back, they actually have a really interesting conversation. So it's a good look at the other side of the Facebook fact-check controversy. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Christina. John.
Good morning, Jeff. So the 2020 election, big focus on Florida. We'll see both candidates at competing rallies during the 1 o'clock hour. Ryan Nobles was with Trump in Tampa for his 1:30 rally, and Jessica Dean with Biden in Broward County for his. We're going to really land on these very starkly different COVID messages that we're hearing from both candidates, political and medical voices on that angle. In the battleground states, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, as well as the 2 states where we had the rulings from last night from the Supreme Court, Diane Gallagher in North Carolina and Sarah Marie in Pennsylvania, Rick Hassett and Ariane DeVoe really parsing through the rulings. Victory for the Democrats now. We are landing on the angle that Michael talked about, open up the possibility for further review after the election, and who knows what could happen then. John King with a couple of different looks at the path to 270 during his hours. We are going to hit the Senate angles, Manu Raja with his Kelly Loeffler sound, Dana Bash and Nathan Gonzalez with more of a Senate step back, looking at the different Senate storylines. Besides Loeffler, obviously we have Perdue, and then we have Susan Collins. And then Brianna is going to do a roll the tape on McSally, historically been a vociferous defender of Trump, plenty of sound to support that. Obviously, we've seen her distance herself recently as her political fortunes fall, leading up to that incredible moment last night where Trump was completely rushing her and undermining her. So we're going to land on that during the Brianna hours. On coronavirus, Adrian Broadus in Wisconsin, the White House task force on concerns of broad community spread in both the Midwest and West. Some really good sound from Gottlieb this morning that we'll get to Elizabeth Cohen. He thinks we'll hit the 100K daily case threshold in 2 weeks. He says the next 2 months will be the worst of the acute stage, but things should begin to improve in 2021. The Rosa Flores piece in Florida where we question, are they underreporting COVID cases in children? We'll get that. And Pete Muntean on United Airlines offering free COVID testing for passengers on certain routes. The John Avalon reality check on Scott Atlas, that's going to get another run today. And then Christine Romans on the GDP, the economic angles. Plenty of international whips, including Fred Pleitgen on the European rollbacks and new lockdowns. And Taiwan hasn't seen a case in a couple of months now. And finally, Hurricane Zeta Amara Walker on the massive power outages in the southeast, and we're going to also get the ransomware story in.
Good. Thanks, John. Washington.
Morning. We also, of course, focus on Florida. Ryan Nobles with live in the 3 and with a piece at 4. We've got Jessica Dean Arlette across the hours. Pamela Brown has our warrant voting donut, and Tom Ridge will join us. We also have Dave Matthews in the 3. He's joining us on his voting initiative. We'll deal with the Path to 270 as always, and as I said, focus probably on Florida today. Nick Watt has our coronavirus wrap piece. We've got Dr. Paul Offit, William Hazeltine across the hours, and of course Sanjay as well. And he's got a piece looking at the Trump rallies and impact on the COVID spread. And we've requested Julia Chadley on the economy, and Christina Leshy will continue our series on the policy differences between the candidates with a focus on jobs and the economy.
And in the Situation Room, we'll be continuing to hit all of this 5 days out now, taking a big focus today on Florida with both candidates there. Obviously, a huge coronavirus hotspot, up to 60% in new daily cases. All of this on top of that reporting from John Avalon about Atlas pushing to slow testing and convincing Florida to do that. We'll also, Florida will take a big focus of our Path to 270 today and the huge contrast in COVID messages that David talked about between the two candidates. All of this as we've got more than 75 million that have already voted. We'll also be following the fight for control of the Senate. And we'll get into some of what was discussed about Loeffler, McSally, and Collins. We'll also be looking for that new Arlette reporting about Biden and the task force for the 500 separated kids. We'll have our voting wrap piece and get into all of the top lines on these court decisions, and we'll hit our battleground reporters in WHIP. And then on COVID, obviously, this disastrous surge. No state trending in the right direction, nearly 1,000 deaths a day. The task force warning about broad community spread. We'll also look for that new reporting on Burke. So we'll get into all of that as usual, and the latest from our key hotspots with our doctors and our Nick Watt wrap piece. And that's where we're starting.
Thank you, Emily. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
Jeff, I was just reading the post, the story that just posted on Biden's digital buy, his new digital buy 8-figure investment targeting young voters on climate change and also the pandemic. And, it is quite extraordinary when you go to YouTube to see Biden own the masthead there. I'm assuming that that's true until Election Day, although I don't know that for sure. Somebody can answer that question probably. But, not just Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, but also a bunch of the streaming sites and places like BET and Univision and elsewhere online. The Biden ads are everywhere, and it does. It's a stark contrast, I think, to 2016 when Trump really owned digital. There's been lots of stories about that, and obviously that was, to go back to Jared Kushner, that was a priority of his that seemed to work quite well for them. It seems like Biden owns it this time, and I do think that's an interesting twist.
Okay. Anybody else? I do think that as we wrap up, I do think Florida is a big story today because both candidates are there. As we look at the road to 270, I think it would be a good way to do the road to 270 today. What winning Florida means for each candidate, and can they win without Florida, and what happens if they do or don't. I think that's a good way to do 270. Obviously, all the coronavirus reporting about Florida very much, I think, in focus today. Thanks to everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.